Hello and welcome back for Unit 7 review for AP Psychology exam, talking about motivation, emotion, and personality. There are going to be fewer slides in this video, but it still is allotted 11 to 15% of the exam. So just to keep that in mind, and that it might seem like it's a smaller unit, but each of those topics are jam-packed with terms. So stay tuned. Let's go ahead and get started. So the learning topics really are the title of the unit, which is motivation, emotion. They also throw in stress and coping, as well as personality, which is huge. And all of those standards or those learning topics, you need to have concept understanding, or skill 1 as laid out by College Board, being able to understand them and then apply them to a given scenario. But skill 3, meaning being able to evaluate and analyze research studies in the areas of theories of motivation. So they're going to give you a study, if they use this information, they're going to give you a study about theories of motivation, but also personality, okay? And we're going to, the introduction of personality and how research methods are used in personality. So let's go ahead and get started. So with motivation, you want to make sure that you have the understanding of the basic motivational concepts. So things like instincts and how humans don't really have them. Incentives being outward incentive, almost like extrinsic motivation, but the incentive is like the chocolate chip cookie or the gold star on your chart, or getting paid in your job, right? Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Make sure you have a very clear understanding of those, so clear that you could write about them. Intrinsic motivation is nothing other than the joy of the act itself. So you might say, well, Sally, who is motivated to do really well in school because, she's always getting the good grades and she wants to build a great life for herself and go to college and become a doctor, and she wants a great life, right? A lot of students have a misunderstanding there in thinking that that's intrinsic motivation because it's a good goal. No, Sally is still motivated by grades and her performance and having that high level of achievement. Sure, it's great that she has all of those things, but it's still extrinsic because it's not the love of learning. It's not the love of taking notes. It's not the love of medicine that she wants to go into being a doctor, right? It's a great life for her. Then the overjustification effect talks about intrinsic versus extrinsic, and how if, for instance, if parents start rewarding their child extrinsically, their child who started off intrinsically motivated, their rewarding and using extrinsic motivation is going to totally squash her intrinsic motivation and really her motivation altogether. Self-efficacy is understanding the areas in your life where you are good and knowing that you will do well, right? It's your measurement of how you will do in certain areas of life. And then achievement motivation. Do you have high or low achievement motivation? And what type of tasks do you choose because of that level of achievement motivation? Needs, drives, and homeostasis. This is mostly about, when we talk about the theories over on the right here, drive reduction theory. So I'll go ahead and talk about that because they're essentially the same thing. Drive reduction theory says that we don't just have a need. The need is for food and for water, right? And for like a normal temperature, not too hot, not too cold, and shelter, right? Those basic needs of life. Then our brain, because our body and our brain work together, and it understands when our stomach is hungry or when our body is dehydrated and thirsty. Our body sends the message to our brain, and our brain doesn't just say, oh, I'm hungry. No, it makes a drive. It motivates you to go get food, to go get water. So I joke with my students saying, if the need is hunger, your brain makes you hangry. Hangry is your drive. Now, you won't want to write that in an FRQ, right? You'll just want to say that you are driven, you are motivated, you are compelled to reduce the need to get back to homeostasis, that normal level. Arousal theory is also optimum arousal theory, which says that each of our base level of not bored and not stressed, right? The happy medium is different. and that mine is different from yours. And someone who needs to rock climb and climb Mount Everest and skydive just so they're not bored has a very different level of optimum arousal than like a couch potato who's good to just watch some Netflix on a Friday night, right? Their optimum level of not too stressed, not too bored is very different, and we are driven to find that happy medium. Likewise, Yerkes-Dodson is involved there. Yerkes-Dodson just says that performance is best at that moderate arousal level. Evolutionary theory simply just says that we're motivated to spread our gene pool, and all of our behavior derives from that. And then there's Maslow's. Make sure you go over each and every one of Maslow's hierarchy. The main point being we have to start with our needs at the bottom, the biological and physiological, and then move up to safety and belongingness and esteem and self-actualization. We have to meet the bottom first. Cognitive dissonance, we're actually going to talk about in another video as well, but it's that when there is a dissonance or difference between our actions and our belief, we are motivated to reduce that difference. And so we either change our behavior or we change our attitude. And then making sure that you understand the basic concepts around motivation with hunger, especially the ventromedial and lateral hypothalamus, with sex and social drives. Theories of emotion. Holy moly, there's so many, right? So James Lang says one and then the other. There's the stimulus, obviously, that causes the process. But we have a physiological response and then the emotion. Cannon-Bard says, no, they come at the same time. So James Lang says physical, emotion. Cannon-Bard says same time. Schachter Singer says, no, there's something else. There's physiological response, cognitive label, and then the emotion. Now, make sure that you go through and see what these dudes say, especially Lazarus and Ledoy, I think is how you pronounce his name. And then Ekman with his emotional expressions and finding the cultural universal expressions. Okay, with stress, you got to know Hans Selye's general adaptation theory, alarm reaction, resistance, which you're like faking it till you make it. It looks really good. If the stressor doesn't go away, you're into exhaustion. And in that level, that's where it starts to impact your health with congestive heart failure, that kind of thing, because the stress is essentially your body fighting off an illness, but there is no illness. So it's essentially fighting itself, depressing your immune system. And then Lewin's motivation conflict. So understanding that the word approach means there's good things and avoidance means there's bad things. You want to avoid it. So approach is there's good to both options. Approach avoidance meaning there's good and bad to both options. Avoidance meaning, they both suck. And multiple approach avoidance says that you have like 2 or 3 options that all have good and bad. Then there's personality. Notice or remember that in research methods, in measuring personality, so understanding case study, survey, and personality inventory, understanding reliability and validity of things like the thematic apperception test and the Big Five or the MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is more of like a multiple choice test, and it's an objective personality test. A thematic apperception test and the MMPI are very different assessments and therefore have rather different reliability and validity. A thematic apperception test needs the interpretation of a psychologist, and so it could be different depending on who's reading the results. Whereas an MMPI is more objective. It has very clear, almost like computer-like coded answers. All right, and then you've got the basics of the theories. So psychoanalytic with the iceberg, right? And then we have our we have the conscious mind, under the water is preconscious, and then the subconscious or unconscious is the big part of the iceberg, influencing our behavior, id, ego, and superego. Trait theory saying that all of our personality is determined by our traits and they never change, which is then also the weakness of that theory, right? Because social cultural and behaviorism would say that it changes depending on the situation. And then humanistic saying that we need things like unconditional positive regard, and we can't have things like conditions of worth. Can't have those in order for us to reach self-actualization. Holy moly, that's a lot. But again, it's a broad overview. Make sure you dive deeper, go into like Quizlet or something like that. Get your studying done on your vocabulary, and I will see you in the next video.